I am going to just take it over to Janet and have her talk a little bit about metabolic syndrome.
Right. So metabolic syndrome really has a big umbrella, but basically what happens is that your body is under inflammation chronically. So it can attack different organs and different ways in everybody's body. But the underlying theme to what is happening is that we are under a chronic state of unhealthy behavior as well as unhealthy sugar levels and cholesterol and a whole thing all put together. But what was very impactful for me at this conference is the fact that our health matters so early in our life that before we even realize that we have a diagnosis or even these symptoms are showing up in our lives, that they're kind of under bubbling and they're there. And so um, what I took away from this conference is that our health matters super early, like ASAP, like in our mother's womb,
Mhm.
well as we are growing up, and
Even before mother's
right
womb.
prior to birth or even conception. And what I my biggest takeaway was is that the healthier you can be at the youngest age you can be and throughout your entire life is really important because those little things really do matter, and it's things that we talk about on our podcast all the time. But my biggest takeaway was is that all of this is preventable, and we don't talk about this very often, as far as in our traditional healthcare system that we have. And so, what's so impactful for me is that many people can change their course of life and their trajectory by taking charge of their own responsible part of their health. And so we wanted to talk about those things because that's part of what our show is about, our podcast is about, is that we want to inform people and empower people. And it really makes a difference. Those little decisions that we make every single day impact us long term in many significant ways. And so, I don't know, Shawn, if you want to start into that segue a little bit with me about.
Yeah. Well, what I want to discuss is about metabolic syndrome. I think maybe some of you do know what it is, maybe some of you don't. But let's just talk about some of the diseases that are really related to metabolic syndrome. So, first of all, you can usually see somebody that has metabolic syndrome. You
Yep.
can look at them and you can visualize them. And you can say, yeah, they're metabolically unhealthy. They have metabolic syndrome. Typically, what does that mean? Central obesity. They've got a lot of weight right around the middle, central obesity. And so, what are some labs that are going to show? So, not just visual, but what are some labs that are going to show? So, high blood glucose, possibly. And later on in life, probably for sure. But early on, no. And here's what, if there's one thing I took away from the conference, I already knew it, but it just reiterated it. Um, the lab that is most important to be testing for type 2 diabetes, because metabolic syndrome leads to type 2 diabetes, the lab that is most important, some might think blood sugar, fasting blood sugar. Some might think hemoglobin A1C.
Right.
The problem with those is that some people will have normal blood sugars for many, many years because their pancreas is still working.
Right.
Their pancreas is overproducing insulin. So you'll have a lot of insulin to respond to those high blood glucoses. So it'll keep your blood glucose lower initially, but eventually your pancreas, taps out and says, I can't do it anymore. I just can't produce that much insulin. Or the it just can't produce that much insulin because the insulin levels have to get so high because you're insulin resistant. So metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance goes hand in hand usually. So
Right.
if there's one lab that you can get checked, and most traditional doctors do not check this, most insurance companies don't pay for it, of course. And one of the reasons why is because the standard of treatment for type 2 diabetes is what is your glucose and how do we lower that? And of course, we lower that with drugs, right? Well, that's really not the best way to lower your glucose. Yes, drugs are necessary, especially for type 1 diabetics, but we're talking about type 2 diabetics that have insulin resistance. Typically, so type 1 diabetics, they'll have low insulin. They're not making insulin. That's part of the problem. So you've got to give them exogenous insulin.